very warm welcome, first of all, from myself, Monica Bohm-Duchen, as you can see from my name inscribed on my photo. For those of you listening in from, I suspect, Belgrade, Serbia, and indeed possibly elsewhere, maybe I can say a few words about the Insiders Outsiders project, about, under whose aegis this event is taking place. It took the form initially of an in-person nationwide year-long festival in the UK, essentially a small idea I had that got gratifyingly large and has had an unexpectedly rich afterlife, but that was to pay tribute in a sort of more nuanced and critical and detailed way to the extraordinary contribution made by refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe to British culture across all art forms. And it happened just before COVID. Thank goodness COVID struck, but the obvious thing was to go online. And as some of you may already be aware, this is an ongoing project of mostly online events on topics related to that broad theme, including, as indeed is the case of this particular talk, people who may have had a slightly more tenuous or minor connection to the UK, and nevertheless who are part of this bigger, very much trans-European and indeed trans sort of Atlantic story that one might be telling under this broad theme. I'm delighted. I've known Alexandra Lazar for quite a long time. We have lots of mutual interests here in the UK. And when she offered, she's actually incidentally given a lovely talk on Arthur Korn, the architect and town planner, German-born, for Insiders Outsiders, which is available on our YouTube channel, which you might like to check out later. But when she mentioned that she was particularly interested in Oto Bihalji-Merin, I hope I got that more or less right, I pricked up my ears, because the way, or the small bit I know about him, is very much in connection with the 20th Century German Art exhibition at the Burlington Galleries in July 1938, which I find a totally fascinating cultural and indeed political phenomenon. So I said, yes, please. And then when I heard that the exhibition that Senka and Miroslav have curated was happening now, then I thought, yes, let's get on with it. Let us make sure we catch the exhibition before it closes. So without further ado, let me just say how very pleased I am that the three of you are joining us today. And I'll start by introducing Alexandra and then move on to a brief introduction to the two curators of the current show in Belgrade. So Alexandra, although born in Belgrade, is a London-based art historian, writer, and curator. She's the head curator of the Wiener Art Collection and the founder and chair of the Association of Art Galleries Serbia. I could give much more detail, but I'll keep it brief. Alongside her curatorial practice, she specializes in archival research into the influential role played by émigré artists and critics in British culture. And then moving over to Senka and Miroslav, perhaps starting with Miroslav for no particularly good reason. He's also an art historian, editor, and curator based in Belgrade at the Museum of Contemporary Art there, which I would love to visit one day. I haven't. Prior to working at the museum, he's served as a secretary, curator, and member of the editorial team at the Independent Artistic Association Remont from the early 2000s right up more or less to the present. He's a member of the International Association of Art Critics, as indeed I am, and he received the Serbian Society of Art Historians Award for the Best Curatorial Exhibition in 2019 and the Lazar Trifunovic Award in 2022. And Senka, his colleague, is an art historian also and co-curator of the present exhibition that ends incidentally on the 17th of February, for those of you who are on the ground in Belgrade. But she's also the curator of the Oto Bihalji-Merin Salon, which is part of the Museum of Naive and Marginal Art. And she's curated several notable exhibitions with interesting and intriguing titles, Senka, including The Body as a Regime, Biennial Biennale of Young Artists, Brutal Tenderness, Despite Everything, and the present exhibition, which has the interesting subtitle. It's presumably a quote from something he wrote saying, "I had to be present." Very good. So without further ado, let me hand over to Alexandra to say some words of introduction to contextualize what Senka and Miroslav are going to be telling us. Thank you, Senka.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alexandra,
thank you so much, Moni. Thank you so much for the invite. I know we talked about this for a long time, and I'm extremely excited. This is finally coming to play. Otto has been very influential and very important to me in my personal work. And I've known Miroslav Karic for 20 odd years, and we talked about it on and off about his involvement in the Museum of Art Brut and Naive Art and doing something with that. And I'm so very pleased that he and Senka have actually have been working on this exhibition because I couldn't think of two better people to actually cover this amazing archive, which is quite immense. I mean, Oto Bihalji-Merin, born in 1904, he was a Yugoslav art historian, editor, publisher, art critic, essayist, activist, all those things across many historical and critical contexts. So Senka and Miroslav will talk more about it, all about his cross influences and life trajectory and role in European art history and publishing. What I wanted to mention, other than the biographical facts, is Oto's immense contribution to art and ideas without borders. I think that's really more poignant in our times, 100 years after his first texts were published. Never more than today. His book, the one book published in English, Modern German Art by Peter Thoene, after the exhibition 20th Century German Art at the New Berlin Galleries in, as you said, in 1938. Writing on Franz Marc in this book, he quotes the artist and he says, "A thinking man should be brought much disenchantment and led to much heart searching by this war on a subject of his technical age. That is, if he has not long since realized that the sacred knowledge of the new age is being not so much used as abused." And this book, written under a pseudonym, Peter Thoene, and we will soon hear that he had many, many other pseudonyms for a good reason, Oto wrote about artists who saw the depth of things, not just the depth of realistic perspective. They did so not only abandoning the virtuoso realisms and using scientific, spiritual, poetic methods of flipping the plane, but through their lived experience of both war and class struggle. Now, Bihalji-Merin wrote, they renounced the argument of the old objectivity about artists of this era. They wanted no allegory, no story, but the world of light, color, and movement. And writing about the Blue Writer, he says, bridges do not exist for their own sake. They span the depths, cross divisions, and link shores. Now, this, in a nutshell, is a definition of his life's work. Either through elucidating the experiments of the modernists or drawing lines between precursors and simultaneous trends, or through his political activity, or debating literary theories within the workers' movement, or through his effort to educate about frontiers of art, which continued well after the Second World War, with championing art brut and naive art from Western Balkans. His mind remained completely open beyond all borders and hierarchies, while still subtly defining specificities of approaches to modernity, and especially not so well-known Yugoslav modernity, thus shaping the wider intellectual landscape. So to return to the Franz Marc quote from 2016, and to compare it with the quote of the French 15th century philosopher François Rabelais, science without conscience is only ruin of the soul. And I was reminded of this today because through the work of a contemporary artist, Joanny Lemercier, who projected these words on a facade of the Grand Palais in Paris, the venue that today hosts the Artificial Intelligence Summit, presided over by one Elon Musk. Lemercier says the tech world is pushing us into a frantic race for innovation with the super profits as its only compass, despite unprecedented societal risks. Mass surveillance, algorithmic repression, automated welfare, job destruction comparable to the Great Depression of 1929, ecological catastrophe linked to data centers, and the unimaginable waste of water and electricity required to develop more AI. This frantic development outside of any democratic process is fueled by far-right turbo-capitalism. We must resist the techno-solutionist ideology and propose an alternative to the colonialist billionaire dystopia. Now, this reminds me fully of Otto's call for action when he wrote, "Unrest the youth of today, because only unrest and fight will do to the new paths and new values." And they do unrest. Students in Serbia have been protesting for 3 months now, since November the 1st, 2024, while suffering escalating violence, arrests, and beatings. And these protests represent a broader resistance to systematic corruption, to the erosion of institutional independence, and to total state control. This is the sign of Otto's ideas taking bloom. Now, the exhibition in the Burlington Galleries in London happened 5 years after Oto's arrival to Paris in 1933, where he participated in the establishment and conceptualization of the Institute for Study of Fascism, INFA, together with close collaborators Hans Meins, Arthur Koestler, and Meiner Sperber. I'm sure Senka and Miroslav will expand on that, and that's a very interesting part of his work. Now, the brief history of the Institute was marked by Walter Benjamin's legendary lecture, The Author as Producer, as well as John Hartfield's exhibition. Mm-hmm. All documentation of INFA has been destroyed by the Nazis after the fall of France. Now, that rings a bell. But the words of Rabelais, of Walter Benjamin, and of Bihalji-Merin resonate like beacons in the world we're facing today. Benjamin has asked, what is the attitude of a work to the relations of the production of its time? And many years later, this was reflected in the essay by Okwei and Wezer, who referenced Benjamin in his 2015 project, All the World's Futures, for the 56th Venice Biennale. Now, 10 years after Envezer, 90 years after Benjamin's essay, 100 years after Bihalji-Merin's first call for unrest, we're now again making sense of a global landscape that lies shattered in a disarray, and looking at that storm that we call progress. I will happily give word to Senka and Miroslav, who have been exceptionally diligent in their work on Oto's archive. I am really touched that Oto's childhood was spent in the same streets as my own, in Zemun, in Belgrade. But more than anything, I'm really inspired by his lifelong belief in unity between art and consciousness. So over to you, Senka and Miroslav, and please enjoy. Whoever can come and see the exhibition or obtain the catalog, which is bilingual, please do. And if you want to support the student movement, there's a link for that as well.
Thank you, Alexandra. Great.
Thank you very much for your introduction. We're very happy to be here with you tonight and to spread word about Oto and his legacy. So maybe it's time to start, right?
Yeah. So maybe we can start with the shared presentation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can start like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The first slide.
Okay, so last year we marked 120 years since the birth of prominent Yugoslav writer, art critic, and theoretician Oto Bihalji-Merin. On that occasion, the Museum of Naive and Marginal Art and the Museum of Contemporary Art from Belgrade organized the exhibition Oto Bihalji-Merin, I Had to Be Present, with the aim to further research and renew awareness of the character and work of this nowadays unfairly forgotten Yugoslav intellectual. The base of the research was the archive of Oto Bihalji-Merin, which is now part of the legacy of the Museum of Naive and Marginal Art. And it is based in Belgrade at the space of the Salon of Oto Bihalji-Merin. We are sitting in the salon right now. And it's been recently renovated and open for wider audience. So I invite you all to visit it if you happen to be in Belgrade.
Well, I will continue with the story about the archive, the personal archive of Oto Bihalji-Merin and his wife Lisa, encompasses almost entire 20th century. Until now, it was nearly, impossible to study the entirety of the archive because of its sheer volume and also variety of material that it contains. During the research process, we were faced with a mainly unsorted, heterogeneous and fragmentary material, which in the current inventory and processing of the legacy comprises more than 3,000 books and over 3,600 units of correspondence and 1,600 documents of various types. A significant part of this archival material consists of the text that is written in different foreign languages, primarily in German, because Oto Bihalji-Merin spoke, and he was bilingual, spoke and mainly write in German language, as well in the text in books in French, English, and Spanish, and making this handwritten correspondence, I would say, a particular challenge during the research and interpretation of this really rich archive. And of course, after the renovation and open the space, it's of course for the wider audience, but we hope that it will be at the moment how to say, important research center, not only to study the life and work of Oto Bihalji-Merin, but I would say like to study actually the whole 20th century and the context of development of art and culture in that period.
Yes, with the exhibition title Oto Bihalji-Merin, I had to be present. We wanted to emphasize his presence in the truly important historical events of the 20th century. Alexandra mentioned some of them, but let's say he watched Goebbels' book burnings in front of the Humboldt University in Berlin. He participated as a delegate at the Kharkiv Congress. He reported from the Spanish Civil War, and he was imprisoned in several Nazi concentration camps. So I had to be present is a phrase that we often encountered in Bihalji-Merin's memoirs, by which he primarily wanted to explain the essence of his view of the world and to emphasize the need to take the initiative and actively participate in the social events that he witnessed during the turbulent decades of the 20th century. Throughout Oto's biography, you can discover so many of his occupations, interests, and activities. He was a house painter and decorator. He was artist, aviator, lecturer, journalist, war reporter, editor, publisher, art theorist, writer on art director, and so many more. We will talk about it later in our presentation.
Also, I want to stress that within the exhibition title, we also refer to the well-known art historian from this region, Professor Jerko Denegri, who wrote numerous texts about, among others, about the Oto Bihalji-Merin. And Professor Denegri uses the term active presence to describe the life credo and multifaceted personality of Oto Bihalji-Merin, his tempestuous existence and his, how to say, continuous presence in events and direct meetings with many, how to say, big names from the world of politics, culture, and art of his time. The general word that we use very often for Oto Bihalji-Merin, intellectual, is in a way, how to say, too limited and imprecise to describe this really excellent erudite, the tireless traveler and the researcher through time, space, societies, and cultures. As a leftist and a member of the Jewish community, he was many times in dangers, but also ready all the time to fight for a better and equitable society, something, the line that he stood until the end of his life.
Yes. So, yeah, let's start from the very beginnings. Here you can see genealogy of the Bihali family. So that David and Clara were his parents. So he was born on January 3rd, 1904 in Zemun. Zemun was a small town, then a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. Today it's one of the Belgradian's municipalities. So he came from a Jewish family of craftsmen who belonged to the House Painters and Dyers Guild. And he had an older sister, yes, this is Otto and his parents. And he had an older sister, Leonie, and a brother, Pavle. So Otto's love for literature and art was also nurtured at home because his father enjoyed reading world classics such as Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Byron, and visual art was highly valued, so especially Michelangelo. As a child, he was already aware and sensitive to social discrepancies. So in one of his later, yes, this is Otto with his sister and brother. And on the right, we see him as a part of literary section of the Jewish Youth Society.
Exactly.
With brother and his sister, yes. But as I said, he was very sensitive to social discrepancies, and in one of his later interviews, remembering his childhood, Otto famously said, quote, "For me, it was impossible to wear shoes while my friend walked barefoot," end quote. It is interesting to know that when he was only 14 years old, he went with his sister to the estate of the landowner Salih Bey Bakamovic in the vicinity of Mostar. It's a town in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where he engaged in agricultural work. So we wondered during our research why a 14-year-old boy would go from Zemun to Mostar to plant peppers and tomatoes. And we recently found a document that mentions that Leoni, his sister, participated in the first Hachshara. So Hachshara was a sort of preparation for life in kibbutz. Agricultural work and different crafts were taught. So she indeed went to Palestine afterwards with her husband and a son, and she lived there for the rest of her life. But working there, Otto saw for the first time the medieval tombstones known as stečci in Serbian, which he will remain fascinated by and write numerous articles and books about them years later. However, as he himself stated, quote, "I was looking for the truth of the simple, the connection with the earth, and yet I had to return to the city, not knowing exactly why. Maybe because returning to the country would also mean leaving the culture, which I hadn't even acquired yet," end quote.
After that adventure in Mostar, Oto Bihalji-Merin is returning to Zemun, and he started to learn the house painting and began to working on a new buildings, actually construction sites in Belgrade. There, Oto Bihalji-Merin came into direct contact with the workers and also with the labor movement and became politicized. He participated in illegal gatherings, street demonstrations, and became actively engaged in a political press. Actually, in that period, his contribution was a drawing the header of the newspaper called Okovani Radnik, Changed Worker, the magazine that lasts for, let's say, less than 1 year. That was our special, how to say, research on that magazine. And at the same time, doing that, he was also attending how to say, evening painting school at the famous art teacher Beta Vukanovic. And we approaching in that sense to the year 1924, which was the really breakthrough year for Oto Bihalji-Merin in many sense. In that year, at the age of 20, he joined the Band Workers' Party in Belgrade, introduced to the party members by then well-known communists Rade Vujovic and Moshe Pijade. And in many years later, in one of the interviews, Oto Bihalji said that he was like extremely happy to be the part of the party because he believed that without power of political organizations, the world would not be, how to say, changed. And he was pretty fascinating with the word solidarity. For him, that was like very, how to say, important, formative year. And we will see that in that year, in 1924, with the 20 year, when he was like 20 years old, he realized that Zemun and Belgrade starting to be too confining for him, too narrow for him. So he decided that it was a time actually to move on. And the idea was actually the Berlin. On the way to Berlin, he made the first, how to say, stop, visiting then well-known writer Miroslav Krleža. Miroslav Krleža was a prominent figure in the literature, in the intellectual scene of the pre-war Yugoslavia and immediately after the Second World War. But for him, for Oto Bihalji-Merin, Krleža was most important because he was in a way some kind of role model. Of course, when they met in Zagreb, Miroslav Krleža approved his move to Berlin. So Otto continued there, and it's interesting that going to Berlin, he brought 3 things. One thing is actually that he brought how to say, and his unpublished poetry book, actually collection of his early poems with idea to publish in Berlin. Second thing was the map with the drawings and watercolors that he also brought with idea to enroll the art studies in Berlin. And the third thing was the, in a way, letter document that the party from Belgrade sent to their comrades in Berlin. So that document, letter, actually instruction was, how to say, sewn into the lining of the Otto's coat. In a way, that was one of his first, how to say, illegal tasks. So the 1924, and he's arriving in Berlin, which was like transformative experience for Otto.
Yes, this is installation view of that part of his early childhood, and then we're moving to Berlin. Yeah, so upon arriving in Berlin, he enrolled at the Academy of General and Applied Arts and worked in Professor Caesar Klein's atelier. So we see Otto in his atelier with some of his early works. Some of them we have in a salon. So at the same time, he attended lectures on aesthetics and philosophy at the University of Berlin, but he quickly became involved in the workers' movement, which was very developed and progressive in Germany, as we know, at the time. And he published articles in newspapers and magazines. He collaborated with the leftist student movement. He even lectured at the Marxist Workers' School in Berlin. And he also took part in Berlin's dynamic cultural life. Of course, he was following Piscator's political theater. He mentioned Brecht's Drums in the Night, and how he watched films such as Battleship Potemkin by Sergei Eisenstein, then The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari by Robert Twene, etc.
For young Otto, leaving Zemun for Berlin was a big event, and of course opened numerous possibilities and opportunities that he had only dreamed about until then. The social, cultural, and political life of Berlin in the 20s was more than a vivid. Significant upheavals in literature, in fine arts, in culture in general, was for Otto, how to say, the environment that was like extremely progressive and intellectually stimulating. A significant part when we are speaking Otto during the Berlin years is actually that his engagement in that period was related to the political work. And from writing, of course, the articles, text, and editing or co-editing left-orientated magazines such as the Linkskurve, then Die Rote Fahne, New Illustrated World, for example. And through these texts and the engagements around the left-orientated magazines, he intensively doing the working on dissemination of the leftist ideas. And we will see that kind of experience working with the magazines in the role as a text writer, but also as an editor and co-editor, will mark all his, how to say, activities later on, and actually was the crucial for one of his most important and for him most precious activities that he did, especially after the Second World War, and that is the editing of various magazines, publications, and so on. It's very important to mention that in the interwar period, he used the numerous pseudonyms actually to sign the text articles in attempt to protect his life and also the freedom amid the increasingly dangerous climate of approaching Nazism. So some of those pseudonyms, and for us was very interesting during our research, to follow all these, and it was like over 10 or even 15 pseudonyms that he was used in that period. For example, like Peter Merin, Pierre Merin, Peter Berger, Peter Thoene, we already heard, very important for the modern German art. Also Peter Waldschmidt, O.B., and many others. There is no doubt that in that period, the entire social political involvement in the mentioned Berlin years largely marked actually his general attitudes toward the art and culture. As a progressive intellectual, Bihali could not remain indifferent to the time in which he lived. And without hesitations, he joined a class which was capable of revolution and which opened the possibility actually of realizing the new social and social relations and the freedom of democracy in practice.
Yes, okay, so as we already said, Bihali was bilingual, so he spoke German fluently, and that certainly helped him to quickly fit into his new environment. He was obviously very adept and creating new contexts. Thus, for him, Berlin opened a network of acquaintances with numerous key figures from the world of politics and culture. So with some of them, he would remain both a friend and collaborator in the following decades during his immigration, but as well as in the post-war years. And we can see some of them here. So from left to right, George Lukács, famous philosopher, so Johannes Becher, Bertolt Brecht, of course. It is interesting that Otto actually wrote the first positive article about Bertolt Brecht in the leftist press, because there were some turbulences, let's say, and some struggles between, especially between George Lukács and Bertolt Brecht, their view on how proletarian literature should look like was different, but Otto was a good friend with both of them, actually. We can also see Anna Zegers, very interesting writer from Germany, then Egon Erwin Kisch, famous reporter, John Hartfield, artist, Herbert Walden, famous gallerist, and Georg Gross, he was, of course, famous artist as well.
It's interesting that in one of the recordings of the Berlin days, Otto said that the reason why all those older, already experienced and established writers, artists, philosophers, and intellectuals with whom he met, socialized, collaborated, had accepted him in their circles. He said, like, that was probably because they saw their younger selves in his enthusiasm and energy, you know. And we will see later in which way friendships, for example, with the Berlin gallerist Herbert Walden or the artist John Hartfield, played an important role in Otto activities and different initiatives.
Mm-hmm. So in 1928, Otto returned to Yugoslavia to finish his military service at the Air Force Academy in Petrovaradin. Petrovaradin is now part of Novi Sad, where he fell in love with flying. And since then, he often used flight and the view from above as a metaphor for a perspective, which will allow us to see the world in a broader, comprehensive picture. In that period, together with his brother, Pavle, Otto conceived and initiated the magazine Nova Literatura, New Literature, with the aim of introducing progressive ideas of raising awareness among local readers about pressing social and political issues in various international contexts. It was a left-oriented magazine, yes, primarily devoted to literature, fine arts, film, and theater. Unfortunately, a total of 13 issues were published because after the establishment of the dictatorship at the beginning of 1929 in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, the magazine faced constant attacks and was ultimately banned. So magazine had collaborators from many countries and had a really impressive editorial board. Among others, international names such as Albert Einstein, Sergei Eisenstein, Georg Gross, Maxim Gorky, Kete Kollwitz, Alexandra Kollontai, and many more.
In addition to the magazine Nova Literatura, New Literature, Pavle and Otto also founded the publishing house Nolit, which was like the short name of the New Literature. which had a focus on a literature addressing the themes and sentiments against the war, imperialism, colonialism, and fascism. Some of the books that were translated and published within the Nolit include, for example, All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, Land of Ebony by Albert Londres, The Metropolis by Upton Sinclair, The Trump Diary and Other Hobo Stories by Jack London, or The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and many, many titles and books by Maxim Gorky. Oto, in the 1930s, Oto had to leave Yugoslavia and to left this activity around the Nolit because he was accused in then media attend trial against the journalist and revolutionary Otto Kershovani, and returned to Berlin. He continued to spread the network and the contacts with the European writers, but also publishing houses, inquiring about the publishing rights and searching for the suggestions of the books that would be valuable to publish within the Nolit. In the general, we have to say that the role model for the publishing of Nolit was the house, was actually the Berlin publishing house Malik Verlag, whose founder was Wieland Herzfeld. And to add, his brother, the famous artist and father of the photomontage, John Hartfield, was in charge for the design of the book covers. Inspired actually by the Hartfield work, Otto's brother, Pavle Bihali, was one of the pioneers of the photomontage in our country. And he himself graphically designed the Nolit book covers, which are still in a way captivating today with their avant-garde and original design solutions. So I have to say, searching for the archive of the Nolit, which today unfortunately is the destiny of that archive is not known. The Nolit as a publishing house stopped with activities finally in 2008, and the destiny of the archive is unfortunately this moment for us mystery. So we had a lot of troubles actually to came to certain materials, to books and so on that we can include in the exhibition. So we had a lucky with some private collectors and some people who like had some sources that can how to say provide some books, and we had a really luck to have several of the photos that were included in some of the photomontage solutions. Additionally to the book contents, I want to stress this situation with the photomontage. Additionally to the book's contents, the covers conveyed a strong visual message, and intensity of their imaginary served as an expression of revolutionary consciousness and a deep understanding of the fundamental aspects of social issues. So actually, also within the exhibition, with the story of Nolit, we wanted also to stress the situation that we really face and witnessed last, let's say, 20 or even more years, with the tendencies, with the history, revisionism that is present in our society. One of the aims of this exhibition, through the life of Oto Bihalji-Merin, is also to stress, to remind the people, to bring in the social memory some of the actors, some of the, how to say, important initiatives and also important endeavors that happened before the Second World War or after the Second World War, that belongs to the liberation movement and so on, that is now somehow on the margin. We want again to bring to the light.
Yes, and unfortunately we have to mention that Pavle, Otto's brother, was killed by Gestapo. He was in the first group of leftists who were killed in July 1941. Okay, so Otto had to return to Berlin, as we said, because of the dictatorship in Yugoslavia. So during his stay in Berlin, he was in continuous contact with comrades in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in Belgrade. So he actively followed the news, he organized aid and introduced the German and wider international public to the dramatic events, such as the persecutions of political dissidents, especially after the introduction of the dictatorship in January 1929 in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia.
what I already mentioned, thanks to his ties and friendships with the people in Berlin, and especially in this case, ties with the art expert Herbert Walden, who was the then well-known promoter of the modern art and the owner of the magazine and the gallery Der Sturm. Otto provided a space for the organization of an exhibition that was under the title Bloody Dictatorship, namely in the gallery Der Sturm, where one could see the most representative pieces of the modern art of artists such as Marc Chagall or Kandinsky or Paul Klee. The audience at that moment, in the period of the 8th December until the 22nd of December in 1929, had a chance to view an exhibition that introduced them to the testimonies of the political repression, as well as the documents illustrating the difficult social, political, economical conditions of workers and the peasants in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia at that time. The exhibition was accompanied with a catalog with a quite provocative cover. It's a photo montage that you can see on the right side. And it was done by Ivana Tomljenović-Meller, then a Bauhaus art student. Among other things, the organization of this exhibition was one of the reasons why Otto could not return to Yugoslavia until the early 40s.
On May 10, 1933, in Berlin's Opera Square, in front of Humboldt University, the Nazis, led by Joseph Goebbels, burned more than 25,000 books. Among the authors were Marx, Einstein, Freud, Brecht, Kafka, Hesse, Hemingway, Helen Keller, and many more. Otto and his wife Lisa witnessed the burning, and it was clear that they have to leave Berlin immediately. So via Switzerland, they arrived in France, Paris, where numerous German intellectual immigration arrived. There, Otto met some old friends and collaborators from Berlin, like Bertolt Brecht, Alexander Döblin as well, but also made new acquaintances with French writer and poet Philippe Soupault, novelist André Malraux, poet Louis Aragon, and his wife, writer Elsa Triolet. And together with collaborators from the world of culture and science, he founded the Institute for the Study of Fascism. The institute was actually housed in a modest apartment with very little furniture, where they cooked together and shared one meal a day and worked completely voluntarily.
As Alexandra already mentioned in the introduction, the Institute for Study of Fascism is actually, when the Nazis came to France, actually to Paris, the whole archive was destroyed. So all how to say information that we could find actually was actually from the Oto Bihali recallings of the days, and also a few studies that are dedicated to the phenomena of the Institute for the Study of Fascism. For many of us, for example, was something that we do for the first time how to say discover when we are speaking about the Oto Bihali activities. And for the exhibition, because of the lack of some further material, we decided to invite two artists, and actually the artist and the sociologist, Sezgin Bojnik and Danica Pop-Mitic, who made some kind of interpretation in their vision, the functioning of the Institute for the Study of Fascism. And the goal of the Institute was to collect as much as possible information about the manifestation of the fascist ideology in different countries. So they were collecting documents, different types of testimonies about the violence, newly formed camps. They collected photographs, newspaper articles, books, with the aim to scientifically analyze the material, and in this way to get to the core of the origin of the fascism. During the 2 years, the Institute exists only for 2 years. The Institute published several bulletins and a couple of books. They also organized 2 exhibitions, and Alexandra mentioned one of the exhibitions that was dedicated to the John Hartwell, and the second exhibition that the team had an idea to be the biggest exhibition about the fascism, but at the end of the institute, they unfortunately couldn't realize in that scale, so it was like a smaller one. But they also organized in 1934 the public lecture by author as a producer by the famous German philosopher Walter Benjamin. What Oto Bihalji-Merin himself considered the most significant and the greatest reach of the activities of the Institute was that it made, in the first place, the French public and French audience aware of the danger posed by the approaching fascism in Europe. And Otto already left the Institute in 1934. He went to Moscow to visit the Congress of the Soviet Writers. It was actually an invitation by Maxim Gorky. And returning from Moscow to Paris, he realized that actually his resident permit was not renewed. So together with the family, he had to move, and he moved to Switzerland. He remained there until the beginning of the Second World War. He requested literally, asylum there. And during that period in Switzerland, he stayed, of course, active to the anti-fascist struggle and collaborated with the numerous artists and writers such as Hans Richter, Max Beckmann, Stefan Zweig, we mentioned earlier, Wolfgang Langhoff, and others. And the most important thing is that in that period in Switzerland, he wrote his first book, and it's called Juriš Invasiona in Serbian, Conquest of the Skies in English, and it was published by the Nolit. And what Senka already mentioned with the dramatic event of the burning books in front of Humboldt University that Otto, witnessed together with his wife. And in one of the later recallings of that event, he said that was also, in a way, transformative event for him, because he said that he was at that moment sorry that none of his unwritten books is not on that pile of the burning books. And that was some kind of revelation moment for him and decision to stop to be like in a way active in a role of as organizer, promoter, doing different kind of organizational things. He said like, no, then I realized to write is equal revolutionary practice. And then he decided to write the books.
Yes, and then during the 30s, Otto traveled to Spain twice. So for the first time in 1932, he and his wife Lisa visited numerous Spanish cities. Otto's ties with Spain were strong and multi-layered and lasted throughout his whole life. He admires the writer Cervantes, novelist Valle Inclán, painters Velázquez, Picasso, and above all, Goya. One of Otto's best-known and most significant tributes to Spanish art and culture was a multi-volume monograph on Francisco Goya, published in the 1970s and the beginning of the 80s. And he considered it extremely important to explore the position and meaning of Goya's art in contemporary time. The example of creative unity between art and awareness in Goya's work was for Otto a powerful message, a way to overcome the crisis of contemporary art, which, in his opinion, had become too detached from the human dimension and society.
The second time that Bihali went to Spain was during the Civil War. Namely, he arrived in Spain in 1936 as a war reporter. During his stay at the Madrid war front, he reunited with some friends from Berlin and Paris who had come to fight against the fascism. There, he again reunited with the writer Ludwig Renn, poet André Malraux, trade unionist and Communist Party deputy in Reichstag Hans Beimler, Hungarian novelist and revolutionary Mate Zalka. In Spain, also Otto met activist Dolores Ibarruri, famous La Pasionaria, then writer Ernest Hemingway, poet Rafael Alberti, and many others. After the tragic death of the Hans Beimler, Dolores Ibarruri asked Oto Bihalji-Merin to write a tribute to this brave worker and a fighter. So it could be printed later as a brochure and distributed to the German fascist soldiers in their trenches. So you will see in this image Hans Beimler, Ein Leben für die Freiheit, which is like the name of the brochure that Oto Bihalji-Merin wrote during his stay in Spain. And as I already said, it was distributed as some kind of leaflet or like brochure that was like distributed and thrown on the German fascist soldier in their trenches. Otto stayed in Spain until 1937. And upon his return to Switzerland, he wrote a book, A Spain Between the Death and Birth. The second book that he wrote, and this work compellingly interweaves and it was in some kind of hybrid form of war reportage with the Bihali reflections on Spain's turbulent past, colonial legacy, but also very complex relations between the communists, the anarchists, the social democrats, revealing Otto's, detailed knowledge about the Spanish very complex history and culture. We can show
Yes, this is the book, the inside of the book.
And we can maybe to explain.
Yes, because we can see his approach to book design and the inside of the books. He always made these comparisons. We see their workers or fighters from the Spanish Civil War, and then he compares it with some Goya's paintings. So that's the principle he will use in his book later, even after World War II. And yes, we're coming to the modern German art. So after the Nazis organized the famous exhibition Entartete Kunst, the exhibition of degenerate art in Munich in 1937, and when the persecution of artists and the confiscation of works of modern art by Nazis intensified, Oto Bihalji-Merin was still in exile in Zurich, but he began the preparation of the exhibition that would be a response to the events in Germany, together with several art critics, artists, collectors like Noel Norton, Irmgard Burkhardt. And Bihalji-Merin was in correspondence with artists such as Ernst Barlach, Max Beckmann, Schmidt-Rudloff, Paul Klee, Max Beckmann, and many others. And Otto even went to Paris to attend the meeting and to persuade other artists, including Pablo Picasso, to join the organizing committee. We have to say that patrons of the exhibitions were very famous. So among others, there were Kenneth Clark, Karel Čapek, already mentioned Picasso, Le Corbusier, James Ensor, Rebecca West, Jean Renoir, and Virginia Woolf.
So the initiative resulted in a 20th Century German Art exhibition, which opened in July 1938 in the New Burlington Galleries in London. Shortly before the opening, the Penguin Books, within its Pelican edition, published the 50,000 copies of the Book of Modern German Art, written by the Oto Bihalji-Merin under the pseudonym of Peter Thoene. It was the first book and the first overview of its kind published in English that introduced the British public to the contemporary German art. The book, already Alexandra mentioned in introduction, the anti-fascist leaning book, traced the developments and trends in German art from the Impressionism to the Kirchner and Paul Klee, for example. The exhibition, featuring over 300 works of art, attract significant, would say, attention from the British audience, which had previously been largely unfamiliar what's going on about actually artistic developments in Germany, resulting, I would say, like in a divided reactions. And within the exhibition, we included even some articles from that time, from the press, the critics, which were, some of them were like very positive and affirmative, and some were like
Anthony Blunt wrote a critic about
and
about
some of them were like criticizing or like having some kind of negative connotations. But anyhow, the original, what we found in one of the Oto Bihalji texts that he published in 1974, called a road through life. He mentioned that the original title of exhibition, the first idea was to be Legend of Degenerate Art. But at that moment, the organizers decided to have this more neutral, modern German art, probably under the pressure, or like at that moment, the British government still was in this kind of policy of non-confrontation with the Nazi government. So it's actually resulting with, as I said, like this much more neutral title, modern German art. And one of the famous and internationally famous art historian, English art historian Herbert Reed, was the author and wrote the introduction text in the book.
Yes, he wrote the introduction text and was one of the editors of the book alongside the German collector and art critic Wilhelm Ude. And since then, Otto was in close contact with Herbert Reed. After World War II, they served together in several exhibition committees in Paris, Brussels, Munich, Vienna, and London. And half a year before Reed's death, they were in correspondence, exchanging information about their current work and the book they were writing. In one of those letters, Reed informed Otto about his writings on Henry Moore and Hans Arp and others, and Herbert Reed's introductory text for the book Modern German Art was also part of the Yugoslav edition of the book that was translated and published by Nolit in the mid-50s.
So with this, we ended with the almost like the period when Oto Bihalji-Merin was proactive in the sense of writing, organizing the exhibitions, and so on. As I said, you know, he couldn't go to Yugoslavia until the beginning of the 40s, and together with his wife, he's coming to Belgrade just before the war, before the start of the World War II. He participated in historical events in Belgrade, for example, like demonstrations, massive demonstrations on March 27, 1941, that was organized, of course, as some kind of guest of the resistance to the signing of this accession of Yugoslavia, of Kingdom Yugoslavia, to the tripartite pact, you know. And he was also present during the April 6th bombing of Belgrade. And immediately after that event, because he was an officer in reserve, he, assigned himself to participate as a reserve officer. But shortly after the capitulation of Kingdom of Yugoslavia, Bihali, together with 400 other officers, was captured by the Nazis, and during his imprisonment during the war, he was held in several camps in Nuremberg, in Stri, in Strasbourg, and spending the longest time in Oflag, 6C, near Osnabrück. The officers, the reserve officers, were placed in so-called oflags and were protected under the Geneva Convention, which meant for them living in conditions that were somehow and somewhat better, and the chances of survival were higher.
But nevertheless, as a Jew and as a prominent pre-war leftist, Bihali was under special surveillance, leading to the establishment of a separate unit within the camp, a so-called Pavilion D, where these, how Nazis call them, dangerous elements were housed. So this situation didn't discourage the isolated prisoners, but instead motivated them to engage in resistance. Here on the left, we can see Bihali-Merin's barrack, number 37, room 7, where he was housed. You can see him with his comrades, and they were particularly active in that part. Yes, they conducted political courses, language lessons, organized theater performances, exhibitions, and concerts, and even published a magazine. So in agreement with other prisoners, Bihali-Merin attempted to escape, as it was believed that he had the best chance to survive and the best chance of navigating through Germany, because he knew language and he knew territory. So, however, he tried, but he was caught at the Belgian border, and he was returned to a penal camp. After the war, he turned his 4-year imprisonment experience into the book called Goodbye Until October. And together with Sima Karauglanovich, with whom he had been in the camp, he co-wrote the screenplay for the film Red Flower, which was produced in 1950. Here we showed some of the inserts from the film.
So working for the exhibition project, we, of course, the main base was the archive of Oto Bihalji-Merin, but we had to be in connections and research so many other archives, and thanks to the archive of Yugoslavia, Museum of Yugoslavia, and different archives that we explored. Thanks to Tate for the of course, for the giving 3 or 4 photos that we used for the exhibition that happened in the new Burlington galleries in London, and also in this case to the film production house that gave us a possibility to show several sequences, actually inserts from the film that Senka now mentioned. And within the exhibition, somehow special segment was actually dedicated to the relationship between the Oto Bihalji-Merin and his wife Lisa. They met in Berlin in the 30s. They were like comrades. They shared their long life devotion to the leftist ideas, and actually. They met, as I said, in Berlin. They stayed for 60 years in harmonious and deeply emotional and intellectual symbiosis. Together, they wrote 2 books. One book was dedicated to the Henri Rousseau, and the second book was called A Small Country Between Worlds. That was a book also dedicated to their travels in a post-war Yugoslavia. Lisa mainly managed the correspondence in foreign languages for Otto, but also accompanied Otto on all his travels and critically reviewed all his work, which he greatly valued. He always emphasized her valuable contributions to all their everyday and intellectual endeavors. And so they were like the part of this place where we are now.
Yes. So I would like to add a few sentences about Lisa as an individual. So she was born as Elizabeth Charlotte Sophie Bertha Asher on November 15, 1900 in Berlin, into a Jewish family. Her father, Hugo Asher, was a wealthy banker, which allowed Lisa to receive an excellent education. As a child, she accompanied her art-loving father on visits to many of the world's museums. So she graduated from the Higher School of Economics, but never worked in her field, instead taking a job at the Social Work Center, where she came into close contact with the working class and became politically active. After entering into a relationship, and in 1938 a marriage with Oto Bihalji-Merin, they shared all the hardships and joys together, from the exhausting life of exile to the post-war period of intense and productive creativity in Yugoslavia. After World War II, she worked at the National Museum Library, but she had to retire due to poor eyesight. And Lisa also wrote several feminist-themed articles, that's important to say, about art, which were published in Žena danas, or Women Today, the newsletter of the anti-fascist Women's Front of Yugoslavia. In interviews, she often emphasized the importance of women's emancipation, the modernization of households as a necessary condition for achieving it, and the significance of tolerance and understanding in partnership.
So after the Second World War, Oto Bihalji-Merin decided to move with his family to Belgrade, and they moved into this apartment where we are now sitting. It's an apartment very close to the now former train station, which for him was very important as a location because of their frequent travels. In the following decades, like from the the mid of the 40s, actually from the end of the 40s until the very end of life, the beginning of the 90s, Otto completely devoted himself to writing about different phenomena in arts and culture. From 1949 until the 1955, he was editor of the well-known magazine Yugoslavia, which was primarily aimed at the international readership. The magazine promoted the concept of the specific Yugoslav modernity, ethnic and national diversity, and the third part, actually the third way that Yugoslavia pursued in the context of its novel positioning on the global political and cultural stage after the breakup with the Soviet Union and during the 50s, actually on the way to the non-aligned movement.
Yes, as Miroslav said, the period from the 50s until the mid 80s was marked by Oto Bihalji-Merin's great activity in various fields, such as cultural diplomacy, book writing, exhibition organization, and intense promotion of different phenomena in art, including naive art. So naive art, non-Western cultures, which we can see here, merging of art and science, contemporary trends, and tendencies in visual art. So he was very curious until the end of his life, and he was one of the world's most significant promoters of naive art. Yes. So dedicating perhaps the largest part of his books, studies, and essays to this field. He's the author of one of the earliest theoretical works on contemporary naive art, The Naive Image of the World from 1959, which provided a comprehensive international framework for this form of creativity. One of the central themes in the artistic and theoretical work of Oto Bihalji-Merin is the emphasis on the necessity of revising the Eurocentric hierarchy and perspective on art and its associated values and criteria. So he advocated for viewing art as a comprehensive process in which non-European peoples, as well as smaller European ones, as he put it, must be given their rightful place.
I have to add that additionally to his focus on naive art and the significance of non-European cultures or non-Western cultures, the question of the relationship between the art and science and the technology in a modern age was another key area of Oto Bihalji-Merin's theoretical writings and frequent subject of his essays and even books. In development of the new media and artistic expressions, he did not see the demise of the traditional techniques. However, he emphasized that the existing expressive tools, linguistic symbols, signs were insufficient to define the new sensibility of the era. Otto was deeply interested in understanding the new practices and tendencies among artists who are striving to break free from the spheres of aestheticism, the establishment and consumer economies, emphasizing the unity of art and life. So he was like present on so many events, exhibitions, following intensively, dynamically the then contemporary, events on our scene, but worldwide. And he was like, according to some talks that we had with the people who were like his friends and coming from the professional circles, he was like really wanted to know what's going on in the world. And immediately if he heard something which for him was interesting relating to the new to new artistic practices or new tendencies and so on, he immediately write it down, and even very fast, including in his texts and writings. So alongside with the well-known names with whom like he was like collaborating, or he was a friend or writing about them, like a Brecht, like a Thomas Mann, like Ivo Andrić, for example, famous also Yugoslavian writer, or Herbert Reed. Oto Bihalji-Merin, with the same dedication and patience, has also responded to young unrecognized artists and, for example, naive painters and anyone who reached out of him for advice or sought a conversation about the movements in art and society. So within the exhibition, we include several of, how to say, stories about the people who are now like already established art critics, theoreticians, artists, and so on, that remember Oto Bihalji-Merin from the period of 60s and the 70s, when they were like the young artists or professionals at the beginning of their careers, and how, in which way Oto Bihalji-Merin made contribution in their education, or like giving them like the wings, or like push them, you know, into the art world. And we had like also very interesting case of one of our artists, Goran Đorđević, who was like giving one of his texts to the Oto Bihalji-Merin to hear what Oto has to say about his writings. And Oto was really open and saying like, okay, but you have to fix this and that. And for Goran, it was like more than a precious advice, you know, in a sense that what he later think about art and made articulation about his artistic but also theoretical practice. So Oto Bihalji-Merin was like very important in the lives of many young artists at that period.
Okay, so we have to conclude now, I guess, and just a few sentences. So, as an authentic witness to an entire era, he was present in all its difficult, traumatic, and beautiful moments, as we could see. But he often also anticipated the future of humanity. So he planned actually to write an autobiography, which he referred to under two working titles: My Blissful Life in Hell and From Belgrade to Babylon. And we found a numerous version of chapters from this unwritten book in both German and Serbian. And we have it here in Oto Bihalji-Merin Salon archive, and we are hoping to publish it maybe in future. And so he left us with the task of diligently piecing together the mosaic of an extraordinary life. And the first endeavor was the organization of this exhibition, Oto Bihalji-Merin, I had to be present. Okay. So
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Goodness me. Okay, if you'd like to stop screen sharing.
Yep.
Lovely. Well, that was fantastically interesting, I'm sure, for everybody listening in. So very beautifully presented. And your English, I have to say, it makes me very embarrassed that you speak impeccably, beautifully done. Lovely. Thank you so very much.
Very kind.
Very kind.
Let's just go. I'm just going to put it on the gallery view so everybody hopefully can see each other. We have a small but select audience, not as many people as signed up, but no matter. But I think given the size of the audience, by all means, make yourselves visible and contribute as you would like in the conversation. I am aware that we're running a little bit later than usual, but I think there are many things that might be said or asked. Let me just ask a very basic and obvious question in a way. I mean, the depth and range of your research is hugely impressive. How long have you been working on this project?
Oh, for more than 2 years.
That's all?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's actually astonishing. I have to say that really is quite astonishing. Okay. And what has the response been on the ground, as it were, in Belgrade to the exhibition? And I suppose as part of that question, how well known was he to a broader public before you presented the exhibition?
Well, I think that young generations don't know anything about him, and that was our goal, to inform people who don't know anything about Oto, to find out at least something. I mean, this is just a part of his life that we managed to research from this archive. We know there's a lot more of it, but yeah, people. I mean, there was a gap in the 90s where he was, as Miroslav said, in that atmosphere of revisionism, of some other values that were out there, let's say, pushed into oblivion. And I think it's very important to, and it's this moment that we're living in now. We mentioned students' protests and everything. I mean, some things from the exhibition really resonated well. I mean, we didn't plan, we didn't know, of course, what will happen, you know, in November, that tragic accident. But now some things really resonate, like that quote that Alexandra said about young ones, like the call for the young ones to rise and to fight for their future. Or I don't know, some other quotes that people saw and told us, how did you know? How did you have that in mind? You know, we didn't, but it really shows how Otto is important, and that we have to look back at his writings again, you know, to see what he had to say.
Definitely, we have to return, and also this exhibition is just that we like scratch on the surface of this like really extremely rich rich archive, and the depth of that archive is, I think that every single segment that we now spoke during this presentation could have like an exhibition for itself, you know, because it's like really giving a lot of materials, a lot of how to say, documents to explore. And as I said, like, it's not only about Otto, it's actually really important when we are speaking about the wider context of the 20th century, and especially when we are speaking the period before the Second World War. And I remember when I was studying the art history in the 90s here in Belgrade, for example, my first encounter with the Oto Bihalji-Merin was at the end of my faculty, when I was like doing my final papers and so on, because Oto Bihalji-Merin wasn't included in this kind of let's say obliged literature and so on. He was like on some kind of list of the if you want to explore more other literature and so on. So for me, it was like really discovery at that moment. And Oto Bihalji-Merin had really, how to say, his style of writing was completely, how to say, out of this canonic academic approach and so on. And he was like much more close to this, let's say, essay style, and even for that period, not what we are now forcing is this transdisciplinary approach. You know, he actually, how to say, introduced that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you know. So for me, it was fascinating what Senka already said. It's like this, his wish to have this kind of broader picture image of everything, and way how he connects and going through the cultures, societies, historical periods, what he is putting in some kind of ties. It's really fascinating. So in this case, I think that, and especially having in mind what kind of phenomena in arts he explored from the 50s, like naive art, like non-European, actually non-Western cultures and so on. Now that is becoming really interesting and important through the, let's say, the colonial studies, or like searching for other, how to say, phenomena in art or anti-art and so on. So he also introduced those kind of topics that are more than relevant today. So it's really necessity to, again, how to say, revisited Oto Bihalji-Merin.
I have to just add to that from what I could tell from your presentation, the way you presented the material was inventive and visually very interesting and engaging. Quite a challenge, I think, when you're dealing mostly with archival or written text.
Yeah.
Anyway, Alexandra, or perhaps Yona, anybody else in the audience? I don't know the rest of you personally. Would you like to ask or comment on anything that's been said?
Please.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me also, it feels like the Bihalji-Merin archive has only just started to open up. Like, this may stimulate many strands of historic research, and especially his periods in Paris, Berlin, and Zurich, and kind of connect to what is going on. His correspondence could prove invaluable to other researchers. So I really urge everyone who's interested to stay in touch with Senka, who's going to be looking after the archive in the future. Especially, my question was, his correspondence with Herbert Reed, perhaps it would be interesting to find out what happened. Where is the other half of the correspondence, whether that remains with what's left of the Ben Reed archive? Is it possible to research that further, and so on? For me personally, Nolit is a very interesting story. I would want to know more about the life of his brother Pavle, his work with the publishing, and so on. So there's all these different strands I would definitely want to find out more about. So as the archive is kind of developed more and sorted, and as we all know, it takes a very long time and a lot of dedication.
Yes.
To sort the material, present the material, make sure it's accessible, make sure it's like visible, searchable. It's a lot of work, but there's so much to be found there.
Is it being digitized? A very obvious, again, a very sort of practical question. Are you in the process of digitizing it?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are. Yes, we did a lot of work, but there's so many things that we have to do. But of course, it depends on funds and everything. But we are really trying to do it, and we're really we are hoping that we will have opportunity to make more smaller exhibitions, more focused, about the things you said, Nolit, or about period, about modern German art, and we also hope that we will present this exhibition abroad, because we have some kind of negotiations with Zagreb, with Berlin, maybe Switzerland, London would be great, just to maybe to make that that path that he went through.
I'm really glad to hear that. I was going to ask if there were plans to circulate. Yeah, very
Definitely,
good. Yeah.
definitely. And also too, as I mentioned, so it's like in certain cases, like for the Institute for the Study of Fascism, there was a lack of material, and information that you can find. Even some researchers who are doing in the 80s, they all contacted Oto Bihalji-Merin for more details about the institute, So it's something as a task, to research deeper, because the documentation is actually doesn't exist, after the Nazis actually came to Paris, and so it was destroyed. So it was like fragmented that we could collect, and make some kind of impression about the work of the institute. But there was like really interesting things about the lecture of Walter Benjamin, or exhibition of John Hartwell, or the big exhibition on fascism that they are planning, but unfortunately at the end they had to reduce on a smaller scale. And also what we mentioned, Nolit, we couldn't find like official archive of Nolit, and that was like the biggest publishing house in former Yugoslavia. So the last days of the publishing house was in 2008, and after that no one knows when is the archive. So we had to spread our contacts, and mainly were like private collectors and so on, to collect the books that were published before the Second World War. For us that is the most important part. But as Alexandra also said, like Nolit is a, how to say, story for itself. So it's really needed a separate exhibition only to deal with Nolit and the impact of the Nolit publishing activity and the whole philosophy behind it on the, how to say, development of the leftist movement in Serbia, and also raising social awareness before the Second World War. Rodoljub Čolaković, the Legacy House where we organized the exhibition, is Legacy House of Milica Zorić and Rodoljub Čolaković. Rodoljub Čolaković was a highly ranking politician after the Second World War in Yugoslavia, but he was also a writer and so on. And when he was recalling his days in prison before the Second World War as a young leftist, he remembered in which way the editions and books of the Nolit made impact on the people who were there reading secretly those books, because for them was more than just like literature pleasure. It was really books content with a message.
So perhaps some sort of collaboration with universities, possibly even abroad, would be interesting to see if students would be interested to kind of develop more research work based on some of these topics, or the publishing side, or the correspondence and so on. It would be very interesting to see how that would develop in the future once you open up a digital archive. So are there plans for the second phase of the exhibition?
There was.
It's a very difficult question for us right now, because yes, there was a plan to make second part of the exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art, where we would exhibit the works of artists that Otto wrote about. So because he was very prolific, I mean, there's so many names, and we wanted to bring some of the famous world artists like Henry Moore, maybe some Picasso, you know. And of course, you need some money for that, you know.
Support.
Yes, and we didn't get that support from our Ministry of Culture, unfortunately. So we have to definitely to postpone it, let's say.
But this project, the exhibition now, has been publicly funded. I mean, you've had
Yes, it was publicly
yes,
funded.
yes,
Yeah, but the lack of the
It's very
let's
modest.
say bigger budget and supportive budget, you know, for the realization of that exhibition, that really, how to say, it would cost like a fortune, you know, to organize because of transport and insurance and all these kind of things, which was very interesting when we mentioned this exhibition in New Burlington Galleries in London in 1938. Can you imagine to organize that kind of exhibition, some kind of recreation of that exhibition today, how it will cost today, you know? Because in that period when it was organized, much of the works were even smuggled, you know, and in different ways brought to the England, you know. So can you imagine to organize that exhibition today?
Well, there was an attempt, you may not be aware of this, it actually started off life at the Wiener Holocaust Library here in London, and Lucy Wassensteiner, who I mentioned before we started opening up to the public tonight, was the main curator behind that. It was based on her own researches, and then she was the director of the Villa Liebermann in Berlin, and it actually went there. It was a partial recreation. There were many reproductions, but nevertheless, it was something. And just briefly, I mean, it sort of concluding perhaps necessarily for reasons of time, I mean, Herbert Reed seems to me more and more an absolutely key figure in so many aspects of cultural life. Jona's nodding. I mean, yeah, so many fingers in so many pies. I noticed he had pride of place, didn't he, in one of your medallion, you know, the sort of photographs of people you were paying tribute to there. There is actually, just by the way, there's a chapter on Herbert Reed in the Insiders Outsiders anthology, which you might be interested in having a look at. But it seems to me that that's actually also just touching the surface. There are many, many other things that might be said. For example, I came across, and this is kind of digressing, but still relevant, just last summer I was in Ascona in the Italian-speaking parts of Switzerland. Monte Verità was an extraordinary bohemian place of cultural interchange, very, very interesting. And who's there in the museum dedicated to the history of the place? Herbert Reed on the wall there. So, you know, fascinating. Anyway, so yes, again, more I think to be discovered. So, Jona, go on, unmute yourself.
Well, I'm just very ignorant about institutions in Belgrade. All I see on the screen is MSU Beograd, and I don't know the name of the museum. If you could give it to us and a
yes, it's a museum of
it's
a museum of contemporary art, Belgrade.
Okay. And your names?
My name is Miroslav Karic. I'm a curator working at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Belgrade.
Yes, and my name is Senka Latinovic, and I'm the curator at the Museum of Naive and Marginal Art. So this salon is part of that museum, and our two museums collaborated on this exhibition.
You missed the introduction, Jona, but yes.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. So last chance.
My mother, Edith Hoffmann, was involved with the exhibition of German art, 20th century German art, and there was a picture of her you have in your exhibition in which she appears facing the camera.
Okay.
On the table.
Great to know.
Maybe I'll put you in touch with each other if you would like. I can easily do that.
Definitely, that would be very nice.
This is the delight of these smaller gatherings. Fantastic. Is there anybody else who would like to say something before we call it a day? Much to think about. Let me just repeat, it has been recorded. There are many people who signed up who didn't, for whatever reason, turn up tonight, but I hope they will listen to the recordings. I will send you the recordings and you must spread the word. Likewise, the YouTube channel, the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel is, though I say it myself, and Jona has spoken about her wonderful mother as well. It's a rich resource, isn't it, Jona, of all manner of talks on related topics. So do dip into that. It's the Insiders / Outsiders YouTube channel, the website, likewise, insidersoutsiders.festival.org. And you can sign up for the newsletter if you go to any of the pages, the web pages at the bottom right. You can sign up to subscribe to the newsletter to be kept informed of future events. And just actually quite by chance, but I think perhaps not entirely coincidentally, our next event on the 26th of this month is actually about a new biography of Stefan Zweig. Connections, as they say. And also, again, just by chance, I've just firmed up with a friend and colleague of mine, Anna Nyberg, who's going to be talking to celebrate the 90th anniversary of the foundation of the establishing of Penguin Books. She's going to be talking about that history and will undoubtedly talk about modern German art as part of her presentation. And that's going to be on the 18th of March. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Senka and Miroslav and Alexandra as well. Lovely. So full of rich things to think about and to follow. And all the very best, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much.
So much.